What is going on, guys? Broken Machine here. Hope you're all doing well today. Season 4 best settings guide. Sit back, relax, and let's get into this, shall we? Now onto the most important settings here for controller users. Definitely recommend leaving the controls on default unless you know how to use Southpaw or Legacy. Default is going to be fine for most. Also recommend you set the buttons to alternate. Now the right analog becomes crouch or prone, and circle or B on Xbox that will become melee. This is much better for crouch bouncing, sliding, and everything in the middle of a gunfight. You also want to go to the edit controller mappings here, slide over to the side here, and make sure you flip the triggers here. So R2 becomes R1 and L2 becomes L1. Aiming down sight with L1 or the front triggers on Xbox, firing with R1 is much faster in my opinion. Been using this for years. Definitely recommend. If you do decide to do this, make sure you check the menu down at the bottom here to change grenades to L2 and go back over to this general tab and change the ping, rows to R2. Similar for Xbox. Of course, there are various options here for the vehicles. We could sit here for hours going through the pros and cons of each. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is recommend you use the same settings as previous Battlefield games, or if you are new to the series, fire up a private server, jump in a vehicle, and have a play of the controls. Honestly, default options are fine for most, but you may want to have a play. Now onto the global settings here. I do play inverted, so all of these are on and up to personal preference for me. If you don't play inverted, don't go inverted. Use what works for you. At the bottom here, make sure you disable controller vibration. It does affect your aim. You don't need it on. Turn it off. Now, sensitivity settings. I use 100 in this game, have been in BF1, BF5, BF4. It works for me. I'd recommend somewhere between 30 and 50 for most players, especially new players. Inverted option there if you need it. FOV, leave it on the options we discussed in the FOV section of this guide. Same for ADS field of view. Soldier aim assist, I would recommend leaving this on 100 unless you don't want any aim assist at all. Soldier aim assist zoom snap. This is when you're aiming down sight at an enemy. I don't like this to snap for me, so I set this to 0. Leave it on 100 if you are a new player. Soldier sprint, double tap forward sprint. Again, all of these are going to be personal preferences. You might want to turn on always use traversal sprint. So this option on, this changes it so that you always enter traversal sprint immediately upon activating sprint. Personal preference when it comes to these few options here. I will say the aim sensitivity, I would recommend leaving this on 100 so your hip fire sensitivity and your aim down sight sensitivity are the same. 100 is 100% of your hip fire sensitivity. So if you want this to be double, set it to 200. If you want it to be slow when you're aiming down sight, like 50% slower, set this to 50%. 100 works for me. I like that consistency between aiming and hip fire. I turn both of these options off here as I want to control the parachute myself. Auto throw grenades and throwing knives, I'd recommend turning this off. Revive interaction, I would leave on toggle. Request skip revive, I would have this on hold. Invert C5 input, I would turn this off as well. Make sure you turn off aiming acceleration so your aim is instant. Whenever you push the stick, it's going to go that way. You don't want any acceleration. It will affect muscle memory. Turn this off. Now for the vertical aim ratio, you're going to hear lots of opinions about this. I've tried 100, I can play with it, but for me, the default values feel just right, so I leave these on. Highly recommend you do the same. I would recommend you turn on uniform soldier aiming. With this on, all sights and scopes feel the same in terms of sensitivity. So for example, if you turn 90 degrees with a pistol and then did the same with a sniper scope, they would feel the same. This really helps with muscle memory, so I'd recommend you turn this on. The coefficient, again, lots of debate over which is best. Again, I would leave this on default. If you do want it so that all sights and scopes feel the same, leave these bottom values all on their default options. Vehicle sensitivity is honestly a matter of personal preference with this one. I wouldn't have it too low. Somewhere between 60 and 100 is going to be totally fine. Invert vertical look if you wish. Make sure the vehicle third person field of view is all the way up. You can change the tank aim and gunner aim sensitivity options here if you wish. I would leave these values all on their default controls here. Now, vehicle aim relative controls, this can be really confusing. When set to on, the vehicle will attempt to move relative to where the camera is aiming. Can be very confusing. I'd recommend turning this off. Vehicle boost, click or hold, entirely up to you. Again, vehicle weapon zoom, if you want to change these options here, go ahead. Invert vertical flight, again, up to you. Aircraft sensitivities, I leave these on default. It feels fine for me. Various options here, if you want to turn on the helicopter control assist, I'd recommend leaving these off. And if you want to turn off the third-person aircraft camera roll, you can do so here. Again, I'd recommend turning off the aiming acceleration for vehicles. Vertical aim ratio, exactly as we discussed earlier. Have a play if you wish, but default values are going to be totally fine. And do make sure you turn on uniform vehicle aiming for vehicles too, if you have that for infantry as well. As for controller tuning, make sure you turn off the controller vibration. To make your aim feel really snappy and your control feel really nice, make sure you drop the dead zone down a little. 13, 15, and 100 are pretty good values. I would not recommend editing the actual dead zone or the max input threshold. I've tried these and it can feel a lot faster, but the aim just doesn't feel that consistent. Honestly, changing the center dead zone on both of these sticks is perfectly fine. Basically, if you don't know, the dead zone is how much control input is required for the game to register any input. So if you set this all the way down, the controller will be really sensitive and you might see some drift aim on the screen. Don't recommend going too low. It will affect your aim. You got to find that sweet spot. 13 to 15 works pretty well. At the bottom here, I'd recommend dropping these max input thresholds all the way down. So as soon as you press L1 to aim down sight or R1 to fire your weapon, it will be instant. Various accessibility options down here if you need them. I don't use any of these options, and a few of those we have discussed earlier. Interestingly, you can change the concussion effect here from bright or to dark if you wish. Some people like the dark option there, so have a little play. Again, subtitle options here if you need them, and some extra control options here as well in the accessibility section. If you are on Xbox, make sure you enable 120Hz in the dashboard if your monitor supports it. Sadly, there's no option for that on PlayStation, but do make sure you're playing it in the highest resolution possible. Make sure crossplay is enabled so you can get into a game. Control hints are really helpful, so leave these on. Reactive hints such as the reload hint, again, are very helpful, so leave this on as well. You can turn off share usage data here if you wish. If you don't want to see player created content such as server names, turn this off here. I leave that on. If you host a server and don't want anyone following you, you can turn this off here. Recommend leaving show XP type server on, and if you do host a server and don't want it to disappear when you leave, make sure you turn this setting on here. On the network tab here, if you are having lag or network issues, turn on these bottom 4 options here, record your gameplay and send it in to someone who can help. Otherwise, leave these settings on default. Now onto the display tab for console here. The field of view is the amount of observable world you see in front of you. A low FOV means you lose that peripheral vision, but targets become bigger, much easier to track and aim at. With a high FOV, you gain that peripheral vision, but targets become much smaller and more difficult to track and aim at. I would recommend 90 for this setting here. The vehicle third person field of view may as well be turned up all the way so you can see what's going on around you. ADS field of view, with this option here, it is much easier to control your weapon, visually at least. There seems to be less recoil. It's easier to track and aim at your targets, so I'd recommend that. Brightness leave at 50, maybe 60 at most. You can calibrate the settings here for your HDR monitor. I do not use HDR, so I don't have these settings on. Recommend turning motion blur all the way off. Leave these bottom 2 options off as well. Make sure to enable the HUD and the HUD prompts. Control hints and reactive hints can be really helpful, especially for new players, so leave these on as well. If you don't want any motion with the heads-up display, you can turn it off here. I leave this on. Show vehicle seat info. This is at the bottom of the screen. You can see which seats are occupied when you're in a vehicle. May as well leave this on. Soldier compass, recommend leaving this always on, and turn down the camera shake amount all the way to the bottom. It looks cool, but it does affect your aim, so you may as well turn this off. If you are colorblind, there are various options here to help you with that. Interestingly enough here, you can actually make a custom color scheme for the entire heads-up display here with these options. Have a go if you wish. If you don't want to see the in-game chat, turn this off here. I like to leave this on when active, and you can change the opacity there too. To make your kill feed look nice and fancy, I'd recommend leaving the show kills made by squad and nearby. You can change the HUD scaling options down here if you wish. I think the default options are totally fine. Have a play with this bottom setting here if you want to bring in the HUD a little bit more into the center of the screen. Your choice of crosshair makes a massive difference in this game. I'd recommend leaving the crosshair opacity on 100 and leaving the outline opacity on 50. I like to go for a pinky purple crosshair. Definitely recommend. If you look at the images on the right there in various lighting conditions and different environments, you can see its effect. Easy to see, very visible, very easy to track targets. Highly recommend. If you don't want to pick that, go for a green, a blue, maybe a red, or the default white. Those are pretty good, but honestly, try a pinky purple. You can change the crosshair thickness to thin, default, or thick. I quite like the default option here. With the crosshair projection off or disabled, the crosshair is static and always aligned with the center of the screen. This really helps with keeping targets in the center of your screen and staying on target. Definitely recommend you leave this off. Dice have added the damage number visibility at the bottom here. I quite like it on small. That's how it looks on screen right there. Turn it off if you don't want to see them and have a play of those settings too. Small looks good. You can change the opacity of the hit indicator here. I would recommend leaving that on 100. Now this color scheme down here is really important. Recommend you do something similar. So I've got a hit color of blue, headshot color of red, and then kill color of green. So if I get hit, it's blue, instantly see blue on the screen. If I get a headshot, it's red, so I know I don't need to do much damage, so I'll probably just go for a body shot. And if I see green, I know to snap onto the next target because that player has been taken out. Really simple color scheme there, but it can help speed up your gameplay. Definitely recommend. Make sure you turn on the armor broken hit indicator here, and I would recommend setting this to yellow. So if someone's wearing a plate and you damage that, you'll see a big yellow on your screen. Recommend leaving show damage type on as well. Soldier damage color and vehicle damage color, I'd recommend again blue and yellow for these, and you can change the thickness down here if you wish. Minimap settings are definitely helpful. A lot of personal preferences with this one. Rotate review, it's up to you. I like this on. Default minimap view distance, I like to leave this on auto. I would recommend setting the close minimap view distance on foot to 50, 150 for ground vehicles, and 600 for air vehicles. If you're in the air, you want to see all the way around you, see what's going on, what kind of vehicles are in play, infantry been spotted, all that kind of stuff. So you want to leave this on 600. You can change the opacity down here for various options on the minimap. Default value is totally fine. Personal preference for these, if you want to change them, go ahead. I'd recommend, you don't have all of these on 100. The texture, drop that down a little bit, but honestly, default values are just fine. Again here, this is going to be massively personal preference. If you want to change these options, definitely go ahead. One setting I will recommend you have a look at, and that is the opacity when you're zoomed in. So when you're aiming down sight. So for example, you don't want to see a flag blocking an enemy, do you? So drop the opacity down somewhere between 20 and 30%. It's going to be totally fine. If you don't want it on screen at all, drop it down to 0. Again, make sure you change that on these various zoomed options. The rest can be left at default. Leave the master volume on 100, drop the music down to 60 or less, drop it down to 0 if you don't want to hear anything at all. Make sure sound effects volume is left at 100 and turn down the in-game announcer volume so it's not too distracting. 60 works for me. Sound configuration, I'd recommend leaving on auto. Audio mix for me is on Astro Equalizer. I use Astro headsets. I'd recommend headphones, 3D headphones, or the one I'm using here. They all sound pretty good. War tapes is pretty nice as well, but honestly, 3D headphones is pretty good. Hit indicator, I leave this on BF2042. You can turn that off if you wish. If you don't want to hear in-world radio music, you can turn that off down here. Various voice chat options here if you wish. Personally, I don't use voice chat often in this game as I'm in a squad chatting on Discord, but you can change that here and your mic settings as well. If you need subtitles, there are various options here, and you can see how each option here changes the subtitles on the bottom of the screen. Now onto the PC section of the display options here. Make sure full screen mode is set to full screen device is set to your main monitor, maximize your full screen resolution here, and also your refresh rate. Make sure it's set to the highest. We could go through all of the settings here for the various graphics options. If you like my gameplay on screen, I'd recommend copying my settings. On the right there, you can find a description of what it does and what it doesn't do. Make sure you have a little play with those, but honestly, my settings are pretty good. If you want to try and get a few more frames, you could turn on dynamic resolution scale and have a play with that. If you do have an NVIDIA graphics card, have a play with DLSS, set this to quality, and you can get a few more frames. It still looks pretty good. It plays really nice. Definitely recommend having a play with that. Make sure ray tracing is turned off. It can look a little pretty in places, but it's really not worth it. And do make sure NVIDIA Reflex Low Latency is set to enabled plus boost. Future frame rendering at the bottom there will gain you a few more frames at the cost of input lag. Have a play, see if you notice it. If you've got a low-end system, it might help you get that 60 frames. Honestly, recommend leaving it off though. Make sure vertical sync is off. You won't get any screen tearing, but there will be some noticeable input lag on your mouse. I mostly play with a controller these days. I do use a mouse now and then. I would recommend having a play with these vertical aim ratios. There is various people out there saying various things about them. For me, default values feel fine. They work for me. But again, I will put some settings on screen now if you want to try them yourselves. Also on PC, make sure you go to the desktop settings and make sure your monitor is set to the highest refresh rate available. A lot of people forget to do this. It's really important. And that's the end of the guide, guys. I do hope you've enjoyed it. Do be sure to drop a like if you have. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Take it easy, guys. Catch you later.